Attitude of Indians towards British rule. It has been related above how the Hindus in Bengal acclaimed the establishment of British rule as a divine dispensation for their deliverance from the tyrannies of Muslim rule. Leaders like Raja Ram Mohan Rai, Darkanath Thakur, Prasanna Kumar Thakur, and others gave public expression to this view. Some of them even went so far as to assert that they preferred the British rule to the rule by the Hindus themselves. The Muslims also accepted the British rule in sullen resentment but without any active protest. The same thing was more or less true of the other parts of India. And so far as evidence goes, there was no general reaction to British rule anywhere in the British dominions in India. The attitude of the Hindus towards the British and their rule in India was, however, gradually changed. The early enthusiasm over the blessings of the British rule became cold as the memory of the anarchy and confusion preceding it and the evils of Muslim rule faded more and more from the living memory. It is almost a universal truth that there is no gratitude in politics. This applies as much to individuals as to nations. The crowned hero of the people soon passes out of public memory. Even if a worse fate does not befall him, for the people easily forget the benefits they owe to him and merely remember his lapse or failure to keep abreast with the progressive idea. So was it with the Indians vis-a-vis the British rule. They fully recognized the immense good that the British had conferred upon India, but general opinion gradually lost sight of it, and discontent and disaffection at the failure to obtain what they had a right to expect proved a far more potent force than the gratification which they had felt or should still have felt for what they had already gained. It is useless to discuss in this context whether the benefits of British rule did or did not exceed its evils, for the people are never in a mood to consider such a question in a calm and dispassionate manner. The resentment at immediate and visible wrongs always stirs the human feelings more deeply than and out of all proportions to the generous impulses invoked by acts of benevolence, which are either too remote or do not lie on the surface. Among the wrongs which caused the repulsion of Indian feelings against the Englishmen and their rule in India, the foremost place should be given to the deeds actuated by racial arrogance, referred to in chapter 9. Numerous instances have been quoted there of the insult and humiliation suffered by Indians in daily life, and not infrequent assaults and bursting of Indian spleens by European kings. The farce of criminal trial, which usually let off the English offender, and the hue and cry raised by the entire Anglo-Indian community, even if a very nominal penalty was imposed, left no doubt that the offence was neither exceptional nor of an individual character, but was the product of racial arrogance. These incidents, unfortunately only too common, rank rankled in the minds of Indians of all classes, and the utter helplessness to retaliate made the feeling more bitter and poignant. Little did the British realize, or to even now recognize, the profound nature of the discontent and the disaffection caused by these individual acts and the support given to them by the whole community. They had no eyes to see how this struck at the very foundations of the loyalty and goodwill of the Indians to the Englishmen and the rule. It would be hardly any exaggeration to say that these incidents of assault and affronts and the immunity from due punishment enjoyed by their perpetrators did far more to kindle the fire of animosity against the British and the political authority than even graver abuses of their administrative and economic exploitation. References have been made to these administrative abuses in the detail in the preceding chapter, that is volume 9, especially dealing with these topics. It will suffice here to refer to some general features. The grievance which wounded most of the feelings and susceptibilities of the English educated Indians was the deliberate policy to rule India mainly for the interest of England and to keep out the Indians from the legitimate share in the administrative administration of their own country. In both these respects, they offered a most unfavorable contrast to the preceding Muslim rule, and they formed the principal complaint against the British and called forth the most persistent demands for reform throughout the 19th century. Even when a competitive exam was introduced for selecting candidates for superior services, the lowering of the maximum age, manipulation of subjects for examinations, and refusals to hold a simultaneous examination in India, all to the extreme disadvantage of an Indian candidate, merely underline the policy of the British authorities to keep out the Indians as much as possible from the key posts in the administration. The Indians pointed out that though the competitive examination was theoretically open to all, the holding of the examination, give me a moment, the holding of the examination in England alone proved to be great handicap for Indian students. For apart from the expenses of journey to England which few could afford, the orthodox Hindu objection to sea voyage and the natural reluctance of Indian parents to send their children to such a distant place and strange social environment created special difficulties. Liberal minded Englishmen like John Bright fully shared the feeling of the Indians when the British politicians argued in self defense that no one was excluded from the competitive examination on racial consideration. Bright humorously reported they might as well say that conditions were absolutely equal as uh, between Englishmen and Indians, only the Indian competitors must be 8 feet 6 inches in height. Indeed, the justice of the Indian case was so obvious that even the British House of Commons was once passed the resolution of a private member in favor of introducing simultaneous examinations, but the cabinet never gave a foot to it. To the English educated Indians who formed the chief pillars of support to the British rule, the virtual exclusion from the higher branches of administration on purely racial grounds, as they conceived it, proved to be the rudest shock, particularly as they had nurtured the fond hope that the Englishmen would never hesitate to offer higher posts to qualified Indians. It is therefore not difficult to understand why the civil service question, for the first time, brought the whole of educated Indians on a common political platform against the English, as will be related in chapter 14. The British rulers showed the same mentality in their persistent refusal to admit suitable and representative Indians to the legislative councils, the demand for which was reiterated throughout the century. The principles laid down in Lord Durham's report in 1839, advocating responsible government in Canada, and the speeches of the liberal statesmen like Cobden, when this measure was under consideration of the House of Commons, had naturally roused expectation in the minds of the Indians that the case would receive an equally fair and favorable consideration. Similar liberal policy towards Australia in 1850 and South Africa in 1854 had further strengthened this belief. There is hardly any doubt that the hope of securing similar liberal treatment from the British government induced the English educated Indians to hold aloof from the great outbreak of 1857. Their hopes were not belied. Even after the dark days of the mutiny, the gracious English queen, which taking over the reins of Indian government in her own hands, made a solemn promise to treat her Indian subjects on exactly the same footing as her own subjects. In particular, that she declared that all her subjects, irrespective of race or creed, shall be freely and impartially admitted to the government service. This was rightly regarded as the Magna Carta of political rights by the Indians. Unfortunately, as years rolled by, the Indians felt that it was as deceptive as the Charter Act of 1833 and that the claims for political advancement would never be uh, conceded. There was a gradual change in the views of the authorities in England. and the Indians were not slow to recognize it. Some concessions were made by the Acts of 1861 and 1892, but as noted above, they fell far short not only of Indian demand but also of what the island of Ceylon had been granted years before. The moderate party in Indian politics had pinned their faith on the British sense of justice and fondly entertained the hope that once the British people were convinced of the justice of Indian cause, they would not hesitate to grant the necessary reforms. But hope deferred maketh the heart sick. The fate of the Congress resolutions passed years after year chilled even the most robust optimism. Though some incurable optimists still continued to hope, a section of Indians, gradually increasing in number towards the end of the 19th century, ceased to hope any longer and looked for other ways of fulfilling their political aspirations. The British tardiness in granting political reforms gave a death blow to that school of Indian politics, which was genuinely attached to the British and never lost faith in ultimately gaining self-government for India with their consent and cooperation. A new school took its place, guided by a firm conviction that the British must be forced to grant what they denied to simple justice. And this view was shared by a steadily increasing number of Indians. Besides racial arrogance and the deliberate policy to keep out the Indians from a legitimate share in the administration of their own country, there were other factors at work to alienate them from their rulers. The India was administered for the interest of England alone was nowhere more clearly manifest than in the British economic policy. The grind in poverty in the Indians was a cause of grave concern and profound discontentment of the educated Indians. Reference has been made in earlier chapters to the ruin of flourishing Indian trade and industry brought about by the unfair use of the political authority by the East India Company and the servants, the misery of the cultivators on account of the oppressive land rent, the huge drain of wealth from India caused by the cost of maintaining English civil and military officials, and various other factors, the effect of which was the impoverishment of the country more and more. It assumed serious proportions and drew to the attention of English educated Indians. Dadabhai Nauroji was the first eminent Indian leader to devote his attention to this subject and bring home to the people, both in India and England, the abject poverty of the Indians by quoting facts and figures. At the same time, he traced the poverty to its root causes, boldly exposed the evil effects of the administration of India by foreigners, and suggested remedial measures. Dadabhai made a scientific study of the economic aspect of foreign rule and carried a vigorous propaganda throughout his life against the economic exploitation of India by England. He patiently collected the relevant data, and his formidable array of facts and unassailable arguments created a profound impression among his own countrymen and even among a section of Englishmen. To him belongs the credit of rousing the political consciousness of India to this great menace of foreign rule, and henceforth it formed a chief plank in the constitutional agitation of India against British rule. The economic question was later taken up by other eminent men, notably William Digby and R.C. Dutto, and was always loomed large in the political relations between um, England and India.